Welcome aboard the Just Help Out Mindset podcast, where your compassionate guide, Nicole Venegas, takes the helm. Brace yourselves for an immersive experience as we delve into the heart of crucial conversations. We're set to explore the intricacies of suicide prevention, navigate the landscape of mental health, and boldly shatter the stigma surrounding therapy. This isn't just a podcast, it's an odyssey of resilience and understanding. Join us on this transformative journey filled with stories, insights, and a collective mission to create a world that embraces the strength of empathy and helping others. Fasten your seatbelts. We're about to embark on a voyage towards a healthier, more compassionate existence.
Welcome, listeners. I'm your host, Nicole Venegas. This podcast is named after our nonprofit called the Just Help Out Foundation, which is located in Tampa, Florida, and was created from a pure tragedy. My brother died by suicide on May 3rd of 2022, and that horrific day will be forever etched in my brain. A few days before he did it, he said he was feeling hopeless, so our nonprofit organization helps anyone in the community who may be feeling hopeless. And everyone that we help in the community is called a Joey. So far, after being around for 1 year, we have been able to help almost 50 Joeys since our inception from homelessness, hunger, domestic violence, and mental health. The purpose of this podcast is to explore mental health in its entirety and to let everyone know you are not alone. If you think you are the only one suffering from anxiety, depression, OCD, panic disorder, agoraphobia, I challenge you to think again. I am also a mental health professional and see clients daily who are strong and courageous, and they have decided to talk about their feelings and process unturned stones in their lives. I hope you will do the same with me here today. Welcome to episode number 4 of the Just Help Out Mindset podcast, where we will be discussing mental health as it applies to athletes. Dr. Sadberry is our special guest today. Take a seat, grab some coffee. This is quite the introduction. This is one accomplished woman. She is a licensed psychologist and owns her own private practice called Optimal Moments LLC. Her areas of specialization include eating disorders, depression, anxiety, and trauma, with an emphasis on treating adolescents, marginalized populations, athletes, and military personnel and their families. She is strongly committed to making mental health services accessible to everyone and providing an environment where individuals can function optimally and pursue their life goals. Along with providing psychotherapy, she is a Supreme Court certified family mediator in Florida, an executive coach at the Eckerd College Leadership Development Institute, providing compensation and pension assessment for the U.S. Department of Veteran Affairs, and provides pre-sentencing mental health evaluations for the Federal Public Defender's Office. That is phenomenal. But we're not done. Dr. Sadberry also sits on a committee of the United States Olympic and Paralympic Committee. And she has worked with professional, collegiate, and amateur athletes as a counseling and sports psychologist. That is so cool. We're going to get into that. She was a preferred provider for the University of Tampa Athletics Department from 2017 to 2020. Prior to moving to Tampa, she served as the counseling and sports psychologist for the University of Kansas Athletics Department and was the preferred mental health provider for the Kansas City Chiefs. She served as the facilitator for the NFL Rookie Success Program for the Kansas City Chiefs from 2014 to 2017. Here, she facilitated sessions to assist first-year professional football players with their transition and to support them with making responsible decisions as she continues to provide presentations to the NFL rookies. Dr. Sadberry received her doctoral and master's degrees in counseling psychology with an emphasis in sports psychology from the University of Missouri, Columbia. What a resume. That is fascinating. Welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
I am so excited today. We're really going to focus on athletes because you've done so many things. You're so vastly experienced, but one thing I really want to hone in on are the athletes, especially from the professional standpoint. And I have to ask, do you have a direct line to Kelsey? Travis Kelsey?
Oh, I wish I did. No, I don't.
And T Swift?
I do not. I do not.
My mom is obsessed with them. So tell me a little bit about your experience with the professional athletes. You're a preferred provider for the NFL. Talk to me about that. How did you get that role?
Oh, wow. That's an interesting story. Do you really want to hear the whole thing?
I want to hear. I'm sitting.
Oh, so when I was working at the University of Kansas, I had a colleague of mine who oversaw the mental health services for the NFL, for all of the NFL. So he was setting up all of the programming and just overseeing like any providers that were going to work with the players. And the Chiefs at the time were looking to bring someone in to help with their rookie success program. So he was like, I just want you to come over and meet with BJ Stabler, was the guy I met with, who was the director of player personnel at the time. And he said, I just want you to meet with him and I want you to talk to him about why they need to hire a licensed person for this role and not someone who's just a performance psychologist or performance provider. So I had this very informal meeting. I was pregnant at the time, so I was very nauseous the whole entire time. And so I just, explained the difference between working with a licensed clinician versus someone who only has the performance psych background, and just the variety of things that we can do and offer in terms of that. It wasn't an interview for me for the job at all. I was just trying to help them make a decision of how to move forward with the position. On my way home, I get a phone call from Dwight, who's the guy who invited me in, and he was like, BJ loves you. Do you want to do this? And I was like, well, I got to see if the athletic department will let me, do that, but that wasn't my intention. And he was like, nope, we want to offer you the job. So that's how I got started in working with the NFL.
Amazing. That is amazing. Did you enjoy that experience?
100%. I mean, I think it was it's such a contrast working with the professional realm versus athletics, like collegiate athletics. But I got to go in. I mean, what we basically did is every fall, at that time we did it in the fall, and then later on we did some in the summer. But throughout the fall season, I met with the rookies once a week. We did different presentations on things that were identified that would be helpful for them to think about and consider as they transition into being a professional. So healthy and unhealthy relationships, stress management, financial concerns, all of these things that, is very different than being a collegiate athlete, 100% transition in terms of that. And then I would just be available if any of the players, so not just the rookies, but any of the players on the team or their family members. So anybody living in their home, if they needed counseling, were able to come and see me. And so I set up an office in Kansas City to be able to see the players outside of that.
Wow, that is phenomenal.
Yeah.
So when it comes to pressure, the pressure that they were going to start to feel from being a professional athlete as opposed to collegiate, what kind of things did you help them assist so they could manage that pressure more?
I think there's a difference in terms of expectations, right? I mean, you still are the high achieving athlete in the college realm, but when you go into the professional sector, your financial underpinning is day to day. You literally have to show up in order to keep your spot. Everybody doesn't necessarily stay on the team. And I think that's kind of the challenge, right? Is how do I have a long career? The average career in the NFL is 3 to 4 years. So how do I have a longer career than that? Or in that 3 to 4 years, how do I guarantee that I get some success and some benefit out of the time that I spent here? So there's just different pressure in terms of that from the coaching staff and from the people on your team, which can change week to week, right? So it's not like in the collegiate realm, at least at that time before, the transfer portal was open. Your team every season could be vastly different. Your coaches every season could be vastly different. So what's being expected of you is very different. And then outside of football, which they know how to do that. So football's not necessarily the pressure. The pressure comes from now you're on a much bigger platform. You have definitely a lot more fans or people who may not necessarily be your fans coming at you. And then you also have to deal with your relationships. So that, I think, is a huge transition for a lot of them. There's a lot of people, once they start signing getting those paychecks, that, will have a business opportunity for them to invest in, or, you should be helping me out. And so there's a lot more pressure from people around them in that circle, and learning how to be very selective of who they put into that circle is a huge thing for them. And they have way more money than they've ever seen before in their life, right?
Oh, yeah.
And so how do we prevent you from leaving here with less money than you started with, and making sure that you're setting yourself up for success while you're still in the league, but also when you are not in the league anymore.
That's amazing. Does every NFL team have a psychologist?
So every NFL team does the rookie success program. So they are required to offer that, and every clubhouse does it slightly differently now, in terms of how they manage their rookies. And then every team is required to have someone identified that is available at least 10 hours a week to see the athletes if they have any mental health concerns. Does every team have that? No. But is it required? Yes. I think the only professionals space that we see that they really are consistent in providing that is Major League Baseball.
Oh, interesting. Why do you think Major League Baseball is following that rule with mental health with their athletes as opposed to the other professional leagues?
I think baseball is such a mental sport. I mean, you're literally playing a game of failure, because you're not going to always succeed in baseball. So they've always had the mental performance coaches. And then they've started to bring in psychologists who have started to advocate a little bit more that your mental performance coaches are limited in being able to work with anything beyond performance. So they just have set a better trend in terms of being consistent in that. And then you think about how many people are in Major League Baseball. So we're not just talking about who are actually like playing, the nightly games, but they have all of those minor league programs too. So there's a lot of people in Major League Baseball. So I think that they've just approached it slightly differently than the NFL in terms of that.
Very interesting. So I'm sure you saw a ton of anxiety with your athletes. Mm-hmm. And I'm curious, what strategies were your favorite to just help them cope with all this new life transition between the field and then at home and all the money and all that stuff? So what was some of your best strategies?
So I'm going to throw out some psychobabble terms. But I use a lot of acceptance commitment therapy, which we just shorten call ACT. Yeah. And I know a lot of people have probably heard of cognitive behavioral therapy, which is CBT. And it's a branch of that, but it's slightly different. And I'll explain the difference and why I like ACT more than CBT. CBT focuses on your thoughts, your emotions, and your behaviors, and really tries to hone in on how do we either change the behavior or how do we change the thinking to change the emotion, et cetera. So it's a trickle-down effect. So a lot of like stopping the negative thinking, putting in different, phrases for that negative thinking, very intentional in that sense. And I use those strategies depending on someone's situation and scenario, because sometimes it can be beneficial. The difference with ACT, it uses a lot of mindfulness and meditation. So really it's saying, let's not even focus our energy on those negative thoughts. So if I know you guys can't see me, but if there's a table, CBT is saying, let's touch the table, let's address what the table is saying to you, and then let's figure it out, right? So we're really focusing on the thought. ACT is saying, let's acknowledge the table is there, but then let's put our focus on something else. And eventually the table will become background noise and disappear. So it's a lot of meditation and mindfulness, which, is a transition for some people to have to sit and be still for 5 minutes to practice meditation. But the more you practice it and the better you get at it, the less likely you are throughout your day to even focus on negative thoughts that might come up. You're just much more focused on what's at present, right? What are you doing in the moment? And for athletes, it makes sense because we need you to perform.
Yes.
So we need you to not think and analyze and, be all over the place. We need you to be able to show up at the locker room, take anything and everything that's happening in your personal life, leave it in the locker room, and go out on the field and do what you need to do to succeed.
That's awesome. Yeah. And that's similar to working in any industry, right? If you're having a bad time at home, the boss is expecting you to just leave everything before you come in the door and put on your happy face, just like the athletes have to do on the field. They got to perform. And I played college basketball, so I know the pressures there are not to the professional level. And did you play college sports?
I didn't play college. I did intramurals.
Ah, perfect. Intramurals, very fun. I love it. So this is all extremely interesting. I love those strategies. I love that you use ACT and sometimes CBT. CBT is a very popular strategy for a lot of the therapists and psychologists. But now I want to kind of look at the other end of the spectrum. So we were talking about rookies coming into the league, but what about when they're transitioning out of the league?
Yeah. And currently I work a lot with the retired guys. Mm-hmm. So I'm on the NFLPA referral list. And so I do get a lot of the retired guys, some guys who are just now leaving and some guys who have been out for 10, 15, 20 years. And I've actually really enjoyed this. So I'm just going to put that out there. This has become a niche for me. I really enjoy working with people as they're retiring and phasing out. But it's hard. I think the main thing that's hard is that transition from being an athlete. A lot of times their identity has been very wrapped up in that was their life, right? And so that's all they knew. That's all they ever did. And so now when they're not doing that, there's a sense of like, well, who am I?
Yes.
You know, and not only that, but that's how everybody else has seen me. Mm-hmm. So these people are having a hard time with understanding that that's not who I am anymore. So that's a huge piece of it. The other challenge, especially when we talk about football, and I work with retired players from other sports, but football, you're talking about people now who are feeling all of the aches and pains that they could ignore when they were playing. But now when you're sitting still and you decrease your activity level, you start to realize how much pain you're truly in.
Yes.
And so I know, CTE and that discussion of concussion syndrome is really big. And so for some of those guys who have that traumatic brain injury issues, you're talking about people who can't remember, who can't control their emotions, and then physically can't do things that they normally could do. And I think when we talk, in the beginning going into rookies and we're talking about the people in your circle and the relationships you keep, when you transition out, those relationships change.
Yes.
When you transition out and now you have disabilities, those relationships change again because, we all think about how wonderful it is to say, I want to grow old with you. I want to spend the rest of my life with you. And we all think we're going to be sitting on the beach drinking Mai Tais and having a great old time.
Yeah.
We don't think that I'm going to be your caretaker. And for a lot of their family members, they don't know how to or don't want to be their caretaker. And that's what they need now from their partners and their friends and family. And so that's a really hard thing too. And then some of them really struggle with, you're not superhuman anymore. You have to accept some of that disability as well. And so being able to slow down and ask for help and not push through and, which is what we would do as athletes is we push through the pain. But when you're aging, you can't really do that. And then, of course, with that identity loss and those things too, it's, well, what do I do for the rest of my life? I mean, I think it sounds great to retire at 35. And I work with a lot of military personnel who retire after a 20-year career. And they're like, there's only so many rounds of golf you can play before this gets boring.
Yeah, absolutely.
So what do I do with my life? Like now it's like,
yep.
I have nothing to do. And a fallacy about athletes is that they're self-disciplined. They aren't. They're really good at showing up when you told them to show up. So they have all of this time and don't know how to manage it too.
Yes.
So there's a lot of these little pieces that go into transitioning out of being an athlete.
Yeah, that was perfect. That was absolutely beautiful. So you've got the loss of purpose, the loss of identity, some with the loss of financial status. And then with that, they might lose some friends. They might lose some family. Do you see a lot of them isolating, not wanting to go in public because if someone recognizes them, now they're going to say, oh, what are you doing now? They have to say nothing. So instead, they just stay home and they isolate and then they fall into a deep depression. Are you seeing a lot of that?
Yeah, I mean, I think the isolation is real. I think it was real when they were athletes too. I mean, other than staying around with their teammates, it's hard to go out when you're a professional athlete, especially. It's hard to go out in the public and not be recognized. And unless you like that attention, which is a small percentage that are okay with that, a lot of them really kind of just want to be seen as normal people and just be left alone. Yeah. And so when things change, you lose your teammates, you lose your, your circle that you had, your trainer and everybody else when you're not playing anymore. It's almost like I don't know who to trust.
Yes.
Who do I hang out with now, especially if they still financially are in those spaces? It's like, yeah, I want to get into business or I want to get into real estate, but who do I trust in doing that?
Yes.
And so there is a lot of isolation, I think, and some of it's not on purpose. It's, they don't necessarily want to. Some of them isolate because they feel like that's what they have to do. But it does make it really hard. And of course it affects their mood and their mindset, right? Of what do I do with all of this?
Absolutely. Yeah, I've worked with retired NFL athletes as well. So I saw that isolation piece. So in your opinion, because this podcast, the huge purpose of this podcast is to break the stigma, the stigma of mental health. It's okay to talk about your feelings. It's okay to be real and reach for help. So what is your professional opinion on how stigma lives in that NFL arena or the professional arena of athletes?
Well, I think in general, when you talk about athletes, it's a suck it up mentality, right? Like,
absolutely,
you just need to perform. So I don't know why it matters that, you got broken up with yesterday.
Yes.
Like that doesn't matter. Show up and perform. And you can't be weak, right? So there's that sense of like, if you have emotions, that makes you weak. Which is really so counterintuitive. Being able to face and have that courage to take that on shows a lot of strength. But that is the mentality, is that you look weak when you address your emotions. And then you talk about men. They're not allowed to, as far as they say, they don't have emotions.
Don't you show a sign of weakness.
100% have emotions. You just aren't allowed to express your emotions. Yep. So men have that stigma in general. And then you talk about your Black and brown communities where mental health is just not something we address or we talk about or it's a thing. And so there's just layers, whether it's just being an athlete or culturally or from gender perspectives, that just keep telling you that like you're not allowed to feel and your feelings are irrelevant in terms of you being able to perform. And so, you have to break that down. And I think one thing that's been amazing to see over the last 5 to 10 years is all of these athletes coming out and talking about their struggles. Michael Phelps, Brandon Marshall, to name a few, but them coming out and really addressing what some of their struggles have been and being depressed and being anxious and how they've combated that. And those conversations have continued to grow. And I think it's making it more acceptable.
Absolutely.
But I think also the more you have providers, good providers that are around the athletes on a consistent basis and developing that relationship, I think it makes it a lot easier for them to come in as well.
Absolutely. Perfect points. Perfect. I do think it's very important for once one guy stands up and talks about his feelings, it makes it a lot easier for the other men to follow. And of course, you have to have a good provider. So we are getting ready to wrap up. But before we do, I would love to know what advice you would give aspiring athletes and what advice you would give the athletes that are now phasing out to the retirement world.
Well, aspiring athletes, I mean, if I were to say to set yourself up for success for that time when you retire, right, is that do not, under any circumstances, just do your sport. I think there's a huge trend right now of parents who are putting their kid into one sport and really emphasizing it, and they play it all year. I think that athletes should diversify. I think you should do several different sports throughout your career until you are getting paid to just do one.
Absolutely.
I think that you need to do things outside of sport. So even if you're like, I'm just a very active person, I love sports, that's great. Try something different. Paddleboard, windsurfing, jet skiing, pickleball, right? Anything else that's not just specific onto that sport. And develop good, strong relationships with other people. Really understand personal finance.
Yes.
Especially with NIL and stuff, like really understand personal finance and how to manage that. And then for the athletes coming out, I think the very first thing to do is reach out and make sure you have a good support system that'll help you with transitioning, whether that includes a mental health provider or not. But, make sure that the circle that you've developed in your career is the same circle you're going to want when you come out. I always tell people, think of who's in the boat with you.
Yes.
When that hurricane hits, do you know that you have the right sailors with you to be able to manage that ship?
Oh, I love that.
And so make sure, as you're an aspiring athlete, make sure that circle is who you're developing. These are people you can trust, who are going to have your best interests at heart, who aren't going to take advantage of you. And those are the people you keep closest through that process.
Absolutely. Dr. Sadberry, you're amazing. You are phenomenal, a wonderful clinician here in the Tampa Bay area. We're going to put you on our Instagram page so people can get a hold of you too, but how can people get a hold of you?
I'm on Instagram, not very good at it, but my Instagram is Dr. Sherice, Sherice. And then also, you can check me out on my website, theoptimalcounseling.com. So those are probably the biggest ways to kind of go out there and find me.
Perfect. And we'll put your links on there as well. Thank you so much for joining us today. That was a wonderful, wonderful conversation. And for our listeners, join us next week for another episode of the Just Help Out Mindset podcast.